thank you for being here, and thank you all for being here. I know we have a stiff competition in the lobby, so we all appreciate that, because we're so happy to have these two amazing global leaders. Prime Minister Ardern just came straight from her speech at the United Nations General Assembly, and I believe, is it Neve?
Neve.
Neve. I believe Neve may make an appearance, if those of you who are wondering. I have seen her, and she is cute. I know what everybody's waiting for in this session, which is who wins the prize for traveling the farthest to this gathering. And I'm here to reveal that it is former Prime Minister Gillard, who lives 10,800 miles from here, whereas you are only 8,800 miles from here.
I was 17 hours.
Yes. So there is a runner-up prize, but I won't tell you what it is. Anyway, I want to start with you, Prime Minister, and you know, you have had quite a whirlwind year or so. You're on the Time magazine's list of top 100 people. You've had any number of international interviews. I read just this week in The Guardian about Neve being the first baby at the UNGA, which I'm sure will be in her scrapbook. And I just found myself wondering, I was thinking about this, I wonder how many of us could name any other Prime Minister of New Zealand, and kind of how you grapple with or deal with the fact that you have this incredible celebrity profile platform, perhaps more than any of your predecessors, and it's about having had a baby at a particular time, and what that means for a woman leader who's kind of somehow being defined by this thing that's actually not about your job.
Yeah. And look, a really good point. I would hope some people would at least know Helen Clark, another female Prime Minister from New Zealand who was the head of the UNDP. She paved the way for a woman like me to be able to do what I'm doing now. So I just wanted to give her a little acknowledgement, and people like Julia. It is an international movement of female leaders that really inspires that next generation. But you know, how do I want to be known? Well, I don't want to be known as a good lady leader. I don't want to be defined by my gender. I want to be a good leader. But I do not mind personally being defined as a mother, because it is who I am, and I feel privileged to have that job. And I have to accept that we don't have a lot of female leaders, and by default we haven't had a lot of women who have had children in office. Benazir Bhutto was the first and only other. So I understand the interest. But my hope is that it becomes normalised, that it doesn't become extraordinary anymore, and that over time it won't be extraordinary for women in leadership everywhere to be making choices, whether it's to have children or not have children, but to make choices that suit them. That's my hope.
How much do you feel, Julia, that you were and still are defined as a lady leader, as your colleague put it? I mean, and I would say both before and after your famous misogyny speech. So how much is that kind of the burden that the rare lady leader just carries, and I think not just in government, but CEOs and others, and then did you shift it by sort of making that speech, and then that became your...
Well, I think it's a little bit the same in I don't want to just be defined by that speech. And it used to, when I first left politics and I was around the world and women would rush up to me and talk to me about that speech, I'd have to say it used to frustrate me a little bit. You think, I was in Parliament for 15 years, I was Deputy Prime Minister for 3 years, I was Prime Minister for 3 years, we did all of these big reforms, and apparently it all comes down to one short speech.
Or one baby, I hear you.
But I've made peace with it now, because I know that speech has come to mean a lot to a lot of women. That, you know, there's the time that they wake up at 3 o'clock in the morning going, oh, I wish I said, in a moment when, you know, sexism was really in their face, and the speech has come to mean for them an outlet, a woman who spoke up. So I'm at peace with it. But I think the sentiment is the same. I want to be remembered as a good Prime Minister. but I do own the fact that I was the first woman to lead Australia, and that brought with it a special set of factors. And I'm on a mission now by building a Global Institute for Women's Leadership to be more and more analytical about what are the barriers that prevent women coming to leadership and how do we clear them out of the way.
So let's talk about that for a second. We have 20 female heads of state or government right now. You're both, right? Is that right?
Sorry?
You're both head of state and head of... No, you're not. Okay,
No.
I screwed that up.
Queen,
Sorry.
though, so 2 women.
Okay, we'll,
Queen.
we'll issue a correction later. Anyway, that is 6%, I guess, of the heads of state that we have. And something like 38%, there's another study that says that 38% of the world's countries have had a female leader for at least 1 year in the last half century. And then if you look at, it was like 12% in the mid-1990s and is 24% now for not heads of state, but for members of parliament. So we've doubled the percentage of women in parliaments around the world since the 1990s to 24%. Now, our Congress here in the United States is 19% women. As is us, and no, sorry, and New Zealand has about double that, 34%. I have a lot of numbers here, forgive me. By the way, our 19% ranks us 104th among the nations of the world, and Afghanistan, that beacon of feminism, is 28%, and Rwanda leads the way with 61%. Right. So a lot of those parliaments that have a lot of women in them have quotas or targets. And I'd be interested in if you could tell us about your own experience with that. But what I really want to know is why are we so far behind on female representation in our government? What is it that you guys have going on down under that we don't have? Or what do you think is happening? And maybe why don't you start, since you're doing that Global Institute?
Look, I think a couple of things. I mean, we are both from Westminster parliaments where you run as a party political candidate, and that means a lot. You know, people are predominantly voting for the party ticket and then get, the local constituency person elected. And so it's easier then for political parties to work out, we want to pre-select more women and to get that job done. Not tremendously easy, but I think it is an easier thing to achieve than in the US system. I also think in the US, the amount of money you need to be a serious candidate for politics is probably an impediment to women being able to make an equal go of it. I mean, we fundraise for our politics, but in comparison with the amount of money you need in your politics, ours is, kindy class, and, New Zealand is even proportionally smaller than that, which is a delightful thing that our politics and the raising of money are not so intertwined.
And I absolutely agree. It's those barriers. I mean, we, unlike others, we don't have a first past the post system. We have other Westminster style. We have a mixed member proportional system, so similar to Germany. That means that we have directly elected individuals and then we top up from a party list. We've had a goal in the Labour Party of reaching 50%, and we've basically did that last list. So now overall, our parliament's 38% women. It's the most we've ever had. Keeping in mind, we gave women the vote in New Zealand 125 years ago. So we probably should have been able to achieve that a little bit more quickly. So those barriers matter. And do you know how much I'm allowed to spend in my local constituency race in order to be elected? 25,000 New Zealand dollars. 25,000 New Zealand dollars, and your dollar is stronger than ours, so he's in the...
So what does that mean? So there's no TV? There's no ads?
So there's
what do you do with $25,000?
So overall, our Labour Party has a higher budget than that. But as a local person, I'm not allowed to spend any more than $25,000 putting up signs, putting out flyers, spending on electioneering.
Your campaign staff, does it?
No, it doesn't include it, but we don't employ staff like that either.
We
have volunteers. So it's low.
Okay.
So the barriers for us running
is
low. So, but the other issue though, the thing that I still think is a blockage, is that politics is not an attractive place to be. And I think that's a universal thing. I watched the experience that Julia had, and even relative to New Zealand, there's a harshness in our political environments. And how many people are attracted to that? And yet politics is a place where we can do good. We can do good, and we need more people who want to do good in it. But I worry that people opt out because it's so unattractive.
Definitely. Today has not done anybody any favors on that score. Prime Minister Gillard, you said something in an interview, I'm not sure when actually, but you said you think it's a very common thing for women to be viewed much more favorably when they are number 2, number 3, number 4 in the hierarchy rather than when they're challenging for number 1. And I think that was something that played out here very strongly in the 2016 campaign. And also I think we've written about the glass cliff and obviously the glass ceiling. I think we see that in the executive world as well, that even female executives, you know, again, in the cabinet do better perception-wise than when they go for the actual top job. What I want to ask you is whether you think the experience with Clinton running and losing in 2016 makes it more or less likely that we'll have a female president kind of sooner or later. In other words, do you think that is making the U.S. hungrier to elect a woman, or that actually this is like set us back in that trajectory?
I hope hungrier. And, you know, I was personally devastated when Hillary wasn't elected, not only because she represents my side of politics, but I know her personally. I know her from her time as Secretary of State. I'm full of admiration for her and her achievements, and I think she would have made a wonderful president. So I'm still with her, and I was just devastated. But the glint of light out of all of that is that it has caused women to mobilise and to realise that this isn't just going to somehow naturally happen. You know, I think there was, you know, the miracle of President Obama becoming the first African-American president then made us think, well, the next miracle of having the first female president is going to happen too. And I think we now know enough that it's not going to happen unless it's, you know, got out and really fought for. And I am so pleased to see that young women aren't, you know, walking away in droves. They're feeling energised about it. And I think Jacinda is right. When you look at current politics, it's not very attractive. And we've got to be truthful enough to young women to say, yes, there still is this very big gendered bit, but don't let the existence of that put you off from getting in there and having a go, because it's only when we've got a critical mass of women coming through, including for the top jobs and for leadership, that we are going to be able to diminish that gendered bit. And the research is actually very clear on this. The more women you get into politics, the more routine it is for women to be a political leader, the less the gendered bit is over time. Yep. And, you know, New Zealand, third female Prime Minister. Fantastic. But
that's why they had to focus on the baby, because it's like so normal now to have a woman.
But the more and more normal we can make it, then the less and less there will be this focus on gender. I think the coarseness of the media dialogue and social media is a new element, which also makes it very unattractive for women. And we do have to, you know, be very strident in lifting our voices and making sure that social media doesn't become a sort of sewer for abuse that then stops women getting in there and getting involved.
So speaking about the sort of making it more normalized and having more and more women in government, and you talked about that the Labour Party is close to 50%, and I think, and your cabinet, how many women are in your cabinet?
No, the cabinet needs a lift. It's not at 50%.
Okay. Well, I wanted to also talk about something a little uncomfortable, which is you've had 2 female ministers resign in uncomfortable circumstances, right? You had one, which the press said was for manhandling, which is an ironic word, but a staff member, and the other was for personal use of a government email account, right? So first of all, I want to say congratulations. It's a real sign of progress when women get in trouble for things that we're used to men doing. So, no, you have to have women in high office for them to misbehave. But I guess what I'm wondering is, first of all, do you think they would have had to resign? Would they have been forced to resign in the same way if they weren't women, or if you weren't a woman? Was there some gender dynamics at play there? And then maybe broaden to think about, how does having a woman in the top job and then having female ministers or department heads, and how does that kind of affect the work culture for things like these sort of medium-sized infractions?
One of those women actually resigned, and then one was stood down. I just thought I'd better correct that one. But actually, do you know, would it have been different had I been, a man in leadership? Look, I think what I'd say in response to that is that we can only lead in a way that we feel comfortable leading. And for me, a lot of what I do is very intuitive. Instinctively, I will see a situation and just know what feels like the right thing to do. Of course, I'll analyse the evidence. I'll give something due consideration. I'm always making sure that I'm trying to make evidence-based and informed decisions, and I do that for policy too. But at the end of the day, I also apply my intuition a lot. And to me, that says something about styles of leadership. I do find that when I make decisions, often it will be compared to the last Prime Minister we had or the one before that. We're constantly being compared to one another. Look, I accept that's a natural thing to happen. But what I would like to see is there being a greater tolerance of different styles of leadership. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, in politics, I think there's been an assumption that's built up over a number of years that in order to be successful, you have to behave in a particular way. You have to be pretty confident, pretty outspoken. If we're being really honest, probably a bit brash, a bit egotistical. Those are the things that we've seen in politics, so we expect it from our leaders. So what happens when you don't see that? What happens when you see someone who talks about empathy and kindness and compassion? Because we wouldn't measure the success of a CEO by how many people they sack or how many scalps they collect, and yet we tend to use that as a measure of success for politicians. So I'm very determined that I'm just going to lead in a way that I feel comfortable leading, and people will criticise me and determine whether or not I'm successful or not in their own eyes. But until we create a space where people can feel comfortable bringing their own style of leadership, we will not have a diverse parliament.
Do you think, Jodi, do you think that there's you've studied female leadership around the world. Do you see a female style of leadership that's discernible, that's distinct from the male style? I say this as someone who's been told by the gender editor that I lead like a man, so I wonder about it personally.
What does that mean?
She won't explain.
I think we have to just be a little bit careful here, because there is a lot of pop and rubbish science around about male brains and female brains, and apparently incredibly wired differently, and consequently all of these things happen as a result, right down to there's a reason that little girls apparently like pink. It's all in the male brain or the female brain, and of course all of this is rubbish. I mean, the modern convention about pink for girls and blue for boys only started in the middle of last century. Before that, the convention was pink for boys and blue for girls, because pink was the colour of the Commonwealth of Nations. It was seen as the colour most like red, which was the colour of valour and bravery. So I think we've got to be careful with the pop psychology, but there's no doubt that we still socialise boys and girls differently, and amongst the ways we socialise women, we socialise them to be more empathetic, to be more emotionally intelligent, to be more inclusive, to talk less and to listen more. And so given that is the way that we socialise girls, it's not really surprising that if they get through for leadership, then they will tend to exhibit those traits rather than some of the command and control traits that we've instilled in boys. And a great thing, I think, for this age for leadership is that people are now looking for the enabling leader. They want to work for or politically support the enabling leader, not the person who says, you do X, don't ask me why I'm telling you to do X, I've just told you to go and do it. The days of that kind of leadership for most people are over. They want someone who will enable them to grow and be their best. And so the things that we've kind of learned to do are actually the things that are most prized now for leaders.
Great. And I should say that Jessica has told me she did mean it as a compliment.
You're right.
But it's time for your questions. So there are mics in the back if you can go. And I want everyone, how many people knew the pink and blue thing from me? People knew, but most of the rest of us, that's a good take-home fact. I didn't know that. Yeah, right here in the middle. Can we get this woman a mic?
Thank you, that was amazing. My name's Caitlin Caruana. I'm from the Australian Embassy in DC. It's a privilege to hear from both of you. My question is, I guess, Prime Minister Gillard, you had famously atrocious comments levelled at you for being barren, not my word, and Prime Minister Ardern, you are only the second female leader ever to give birth in office. My question is, how do we win? You're damned if you do and you're damned if you don't. You know, you can't possibly be a good leader because you don't have children, but it's impossible to have children in office.
Adoption, maybe?
How do we win?
You could adopt an adult.
That's right.
Maybe I should have done that.
Foster care.
Only a woman would have such a practical answer. What's your answer to that?
Oh, no, look, I think we're not at a stage where we can win this. I mean, what you've just said plays out for female candidates all around the world. You know, if you don't have children, how can you understand anything about family life? If you do have kids, well, who's looking after them while you're running around doing this business of politics? I think one of the great things about, you know, your example to the world, and you shouldn't underestimate it, one of the great things is to show that it is possible. And if it is possible, then that questioning in the future about, well, who's looking after the kids, and, you know, a woman can't be a mother at the same time that she's leading, you know, examples like yours will help those questions fall away.
Because I think you're absolutely right. For now, you can't win. We don't win, but you know, hopefully over time, some of this will ebb away, and the questions will stop being asked, and the guilt will stop being laid out, and the criticism will stop. But can I?
Yeah,
oh, just one last thing I just wanted to throw in. You know, I can hear little Neve back there, and I know she's okay because she's with my partner Clark. I could not do this without him, and we need more male role models as well, and here's one of them.
So I want to pick up on that. I'm sorry, because I really want to. Two things. First of all, I think there's also this: you can't win if you talk too much like a man, or I mean, there's all that duality. But I think I want to talk to you about your husband a little bit, because we were at a dinner.
He hasn't proposed yet. I'm not at all sensitive about it.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. I always joke.
I mean, this would be a nice time if he was. I mean, that guy on the Academy Awards did pretty well. That was, or the Emmys, whatever. We were at a dinner recently, a sort of power women's dinner that Meredith Levian hosted, and there were about 20 of us. And at one point, we realized that so many of us had partners who were stay-at-home parents, or really had downshifted their career to support our careers. And we all felt quite grateful of it. Mine, you know, quit his job twice to move first from Chicago to Brooklyn and then to Jerusalem. And we also felt kind of crappy about that reality. You know, we felt very glad we had it, but and we thought about also so many male leaders who have stay-at-home partners too. I mean, I don't know. Just talk a little bit more about it, because I appreciate what you're saying about you couldn't do without him, but I feel like there's something
you hit upon a key word there. I think that I hear all the time from women in all walks of life: guilt. It's just guilt for not being around enough, guilt for not being at home enough, guilt for not being at work enough, just guilt.
Is there something you can do to help us?
Yeah, if I could remove guilt for women, that would be spectacular, because again, you can't win. But the thing that really struck me when we announced just the way that we were going to make this particular situation work, the number of men that came and approached us and said, that's exactly what I did. You know, it was a decade ago or 2 decades ago, and we did that too. It's not abnormal, and yet we don't talk about it that much. And so I think actually giving a bit of profile to that, and the fact that Clark's a broadcaster and he's a dad. We co-parent. He doesn't babysit. He's not a babysitter.
Right.
He's a co-parent, and we parent together. It just happens that he does more of it.
So now I feel guilty that I took up your time. So is there one more question from the audience, because I'm being told they have to wrap up? Yes. Oh, shout it out. Oh, no, here he comes.
You know, I was very impressed with the remark that you refuse to believe that you can't be compassionate and strong. I mean, really, I wanted to hug you. But my question is, How do you think we implement that as a practical matter from the political leadership role?
Yeah, it's a really great question. You know, and this is going to sound probably a little bit dull, but how do you put empathy and kindness into the way that you govern? You stop using old measures of success. You stop saying that the only thing that matters is GDP, you know, and debt levels and your trade deficit or surplus. And you start saying, well, actually what matters is whether or not everyone has a home and whether or not families have enough income to make sure their kids are well looked after, and that our mental health and well-being really matters. And you measure yourself against it, because what gets measured gets done. So we've decided that we're going to create indicators across all of those areas. And our budgets will show the New Zealand public not just how we're doing economically, but how we're doing socially, environmentally, culturally. And we're going to trial that from next year. And if we succeed, we'll be the first country in the world really to start embedding what I think are measures of happiness and well-being into what we do. Yeah.
Thank you both. We are out of